Retro.
Today's show is brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/Animanicast. Special thanks goes out to Brian, Micah, Marjorie, Marty, Melissa, Patrick, Bemused Horseman, Christian, James, Kyle, Mastertune, McCoy, MJ, Nevi, Ketzel, Rapid Kirby 3K, Tamara, the Inferno Birdie, the Cartoon Gamer, and Weffy. And all of these patrons have been getting not only Creators Commentary Series, these are Animaniacs commentaries featuring the creator of the show, Tom Ruegger, but they've been also getting other perks such as Animaniacs decals and even signed Animaniacs trading cards signed by Tom Ruegger. But this April, we're also going to be giving them commentaries from today's guest, Peter Hastings. So, if you were interested in getting all those different perks and helping support our show, head on over to patreon.com/Animanicast today, and thank you for your support. And welcome everybody once again to another episode of the Animanicast.
You as well, go.
Come on, Brain. I write all your best material.
Shakespeare wrote my best material. You write drivel unfit for a light bulb commercial.
Welcome everybody once again to the Animanicast. This, of course, is the podcast that's dedicated to the animated television series Animaniacs, as well as other shows within the Rueggerverse, such as Tiny Toon Adventures, Pinkie and the Brain, and Freakazoid. Now, we usually discuss the cultural references and gags of each episode we watch, but today we have an interview with one of the original writers of the show. I am Joey, and joining me once again is my brother Nathan. Hi. And across the country in Georgia, there's Kelly.
Hello.
And joining us for the first time is a man whose name you might recognize from the title cards of Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, and Pinky and the Brain as a writer and producer. But he's also the man who has directed animatronic bears in Disney's The Country Bears, as well as being a writer and executive producer in Lilo and Stitch series, the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series, the Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness, and of course the epic tales of Captain Underpants. And he's also been a voice actor, and he plays a mean bass. It's Mr. Peter Hastings. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
Nice to finally have you on. Yes, you might, if you're lucky, one of these days you might be just as lucky as us to see Mr. Hastings performing live in Animaniacs in concert with Rob Paulson and Randy Roga. Because we were, and it was quite an experience.
It was super fun. We did it twice. We did it twice, actually. The time that you guys saw it in San Diego around Comic-Con time, and before that with an orchestra in La Mirada, California, which was really crazy.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the show and everything like that. There's so many of our favorite episodes of Animaniacs, and as we're revisiting Tiny Toon Adventures and of course Pinky and the Brain, your name pops up so often on these episodes, and we're like, we've had Paul on, and we've had Charles M. Howell and John P. McCann, and of course Tom Ruegger on many times, and Sherry Stoner and Deanna Oliver. But you're one of those missing links. So we're like collectors. We got to catch them all. You're a Pokemon now.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming on. We have some questions here for you, and I think we'll get right into it. Now let's start way back as far back as I could find on the internet anyway. You're an alum from the Groundlings, and I was wondering how improv comedy has helped you as a writer. And do you think maybe writers should get into improv comedy as well? Is that helpful in the writing process?
Yeah, I think it's super helpful. I mean, the Groundlings is kind of interesting because you go through that program. It's improv comedy and sketch comedy, and it's really where I started to write. So, because I went to music school and I came to Los Angeles as a musician, but I ended up taking this improv class at the Groundlings and then went through their whole little school system and then ended up as a performing member of the company. So that's really where I started to write and writing character stuff and doing improv. I think people also, they'll say like, oh, you're like, you can do that because you're a groundling. But I think it's more like you have a personality that suits itself to being a groundling and to doing sketch comedy and doing improv. Improv is super valuable because, over time, because, for me, because I improvise the characters that I'm writing all the time. And it's really, so to me, there's kind of a process of like when you're writing for a character that you, it's like, here, I wrote some words and I want you to say them. And then you kind of get to know the character and then you're like, oh, so-and-so would say this. This is the way they would say that. And then you really get it where you understand the character so well. You just kind of write down what you sort of hear them saying in a way. And it's a lot of that is just improvising and doing it out loud and doing it in voices and I do it all the time. And it has a vitality to it. Also, when you speak your lines out loud, you just write more naturalistic kind of regular dialogue. So the improv stuff is really, really helpful. Lets you go crazy, lets you go all over the place. It was fun. Also at the Groundlings is where, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, but it was a lot of the Animaniacs writing staff came out of this. So I was in the Groundlings, Deanna was in the Groundlings, and Sherry Stoner was in the Groundlings. So originally, Sherry asked me to come in and help develop a spinoff from Tiny Toons, actually. Mm-hmm. And that I'll tell you about. But, I knew Sherry from the Groundlings. We performed together. And then she was in some things that I had written. And so she's the one who brought me into Warner Brothers. And then that's where also we knew Deanna from. So Deanna was also from the Groundlings. And not people with, animation writing experience, but more like funny people, who learned how to write that stuff.
When it came to writing that stuff originally, I know Paul Rugg has talked to us about how he had to put in stage directions, and he was very, very clear about camera up and then all this. Was that a difficult process for you, at least initially getting into that sort of writing? Or
I think so, because it's like a grammar of camera language, and it's like you need to learn things like if you're shooting something live action, when people do a master and then they do an over the shoulder and then they do a close up and then they do another over the shoulder, then they do another close up, and this is the shots you use to build a scene. And we didn't really know that stuff so much. So the camera angle stuff was much more about this is what's important for people to see. We did a lot of that stuff, and in general, it's not really in favor with most directors and writers like that. It's kind of like, don't tell me what to do sort of thing. And I know Paul, for example, likes doing that, but it speaks more to his understanding or my understanding of like, it's really a directing thing is what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You're kind of directing on the page, and then he has that capacity, to like, this is how I want to see it. This is the timing, that kind of comes out. When I look back at like the first things that I wrote, I thought I knew what I was doing, but when you look back after you have a lot of experience, I go like, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just like, was kind of plodding my way, and I didn't get fired. So that was, I got to stay long enough to really kind of learn how to do it.
Exactly. Well, hey, that was fortunate. Well, we've been going over actually, in between Animaniacs, many Tiny Toon Adventure episodes. A lot of them actually are ones that you wrote, like Konducky comes to mind. Toon TV is one that you co-wrote. I think we did Weekday Afternoon Live, a lot of things like that. Do you have any favorite episodes or just favorite memories of working on Tiny Toons?
Yeah, I kind of came into Tiny Toons late. So basically the way I came in was that Steven was interested in doing a spin-off show based on the character of Elmira Duff, and Duff is Fudd backwards as in Elmer Fudd. And if you didn't know that, and it was a sort of a family, animated sitcom based on the Duff family. And so she just asked me to come in and help develop that. So we developed that. And then like 2 weeks later, we went and they're like, okay, you're going to go pitch that to Spielberg. So I had my first Spielberg meeting, pitching there, and it went well. Obviously we didn't make the show, but, then I was, just on Tiny Toons right after that. They hired me right away. And I kind of, fumbled my way through in writing. I think I'd just written like 1 or 2 scripts before that. And I kind of came in on that tail end of Tiny Toons. And, there was the ones that I really liked, was like a Return of Bat Duck I wrote, and, Konducky and the Oklahoma, Ducklahoma. Which, Ducklahoma was all about like, how can we do anvils? That one is that, it's got those songs like I don't remember the words, but something like, there's a dark glossy sheen on the anvil, and it was all those sort of parodies of Oklahoma songs and stuff like that.
There's a nice flat black sheen on the anvil. There's a nice flat black sheen on the anvil. It goes up from the ground to rise way above town. And it looks like it's falling, it's coming straight down. Oh, such a wonderful anvil! Oh, how it fills me with glee. But now I'm changing my thinking. That anvils are falling on me.
But those are fun. And that Return of Bat Duck was all based on, this is what happens. It's like you're in a meeting with Steven and he starts telling the story about how, I'm forgetting her name, the actress's name, but she wanted to play Catwoman and she dressed up like Catwoman and showed up at Tim Burton's office and to basically ambush him for the part was Sean Young. Is that her name?
I know the actress's face. I just can't grasp
and that Tim Burton climbed out the window of his office to escape her. And it was like they're just telling that story and then it's like, oh, we should use that and do something about that. So it was about Plucky Duck storming and Tim Burton, the caricature of Tim Burton's in there.
Plucky Duck here to see Tim Burton. Hey, it's me, Plucky Duck. Don't do it, Tim. You've got everything to live for. You're young. You know Michelle Pfeiffer. And the best reason of all, you've got me to play Batman. Didn't you see me as Bat Duck? T-shirt still available.
Tim! I should be Catwoman, you know it! Look at me! It's unavoidable! Roar! Roar! You know what to do with me!
You're right, I do.
Ooh, look at the pretty kitty! I'm gonna love you to pieces, you cute kitty witty head. I've got kitty food and kitty milk and kitty litter and kitty toys.
I remember seeing that as a kid, not really quite getting why this was going on, but still thinking it was funny. And I think that's one of the things that really was great about not just Tiny Toons, but of course Animaniacs, was the fact that you guys were just writing stuff that you knew was funny. And, kids would, if they got it, great, but it didn't really matter. What was important was that it was funny for you guys. And I think it's one of the reasons I think it actually is, it stands out from other shows so much.
Yeah. I've been doing, making cartoons and that's really for the kids space for like 30 years. I don't think I've ever really thought about kids. I just like, it's just like, don't make it inappropriate for kids. The way I think about kids is like, I want to expose kids to this style of humor. I want to expose kids to this idea. I want to expose them to this thing. In the same way that's like when I watched Bugs Bunny cartoons and you'd see Bugs do an impression of Jack Benny. It's like, I didn't know who Jack Benny was. And then, and then he would show up and you go like, oh, that's what, But here's the thing is if you don't know who Jack Benny is, it's just an interesting character. It's just fun. So many of the reference things are like that. It's sort of like if you don't know who it is or what it's referring, you get it, enjoyment from it on some other level.
So you had started at Tiny Toons. Is that how you got into working with Animaniacs then?
Yeah. So when we finished up Tiny Toons, I know you know the story, but Steven was sort of like, let's do another show, but let's do something that's all original, not based on like Looney Tunes. And so writer wise, there were 4 of us in the building, plus Tom. So it was Deanna Oliver, Sherry Stoner, myself, and Nick Hollander. We were sort of the leftover Tiny Toons people. And we started to develop Animaniacs. And so at that time, it was really like, we were on staff at Warner Brothers. Like, they don't do this anymore. Now everything is like project specific and you get an end date. But we were just like on staff. And then, that process was like, we sort of developed this idea. We want to do something that's sort of a variety show in some fashion, blah, blah, blah. And then all of us would just go to our offices and come up with character combinations and, all the bits that are in Animaniacs and a ton of them that aren't in Animaniacs. Mm-hmm. And then we would bring all these things and give everything to Tom and make this big fat document and we'd take it home and we'd all read it, So Tom was really shaping all of the stuff that came in but it was very much a group effort in developing, the series. And, so like, Deanna's main thing was the Goodfellas and Sherry was doing the Rita and Runt and she was doing, I think Mindy and Buttons was also like Deanna and, Pinkie and the Brain was my main thing. And then when John McCann and Paul Rugg came in, they were more on the Warners. Like everybody kind of had their specialty and Randy Rogel was writing songs and, it was, it kind of shook out that way. So, but we all just kind of worked on that. And then, and the artists were doing designs and then the Ghost pitched that to Steven and he's like, I like this and I don't like that. And, all that was going on.
Were there any ideas that you had that didn't make it that you were sad to law? I don't know.
It's there's one. I sort of remember hearing Tom mention this one Bossy Beaver that we were going to do, which was kind of based on a crew member who was pretty It's time because it was like it's time to work for the buck-toothed jerk, the one with the big ego. Yeah, better get it right, or there'll be a fight. It has to be just so. He'll yell all day till the hair turns gray till the something's in it. It's the Bossy Beaver show. Okay. But, and we had Bossy Beaver and we had a soap opera thing with amoebas. I don't remember what that was called. And just kind of come up with weird stuff. Like Deanna would come in and say like, oh, I saw this like lizard outside my house. And then she just comes up with a thing called Gecko and Chuckwalla and,
yes, we've heard of some of these
Baby Maze.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. Oh, that's a new one. Baby Maze.
There were time. Yeah. Wow. There were time because we didn't edit it. We just kept. And then when we started making them, some of them just really popped in a good way, and some of them were fine. I mean, you don't hear a lot of people saying like, "Oh my God, I love the hip hippos." It's like.
There's certain yuppie crowd people, I think, that really just identified with them. But other than that, I think most people.
Yeah,
they're kind of the forgotten.
There's a few bits like that. You forget there's so many, actually. But that process was really fun. And then, so I was in there, I was writing some of the Warner Brothers stuff. And then that was really, for me, it was the Marx Brothers absolutely was the core thing. And then, but it was really about getting Yakko's voice into the Groucho kind of thing, which is just this rapid fire comeback, twisting people's words, doing all this, double entendres, doing all that kind of stuff. Where kind of like we would like walk to lunch and like talk like that.
Gentlemen, please be seated. I didn't say Simon Says. Simon Says, please be seated. So, what's the plan?
The situation is grave. Our army hasn't been to war in 200 years.
They should be very well rested then.
First, we must prepare the troops.
No, first we must get new weapons.
You're both wrong. First, we must have a new national anthem. Hit it! Oh, the anvil shine in my old Anvilian home. Thank you. Please be seated. Very good. Simon Says, please be seated.
And then, but the thing also, so most of my, my standout stuff really was doing Pinky in the Brain. And then, when it became its own show, then I ran that show. And, my version, because everybody has little different memories, but I have this very specific memory of going into Tom's office. And I know you guys know the story that it's based on the Eddie Fitzgerald and Tom Minton, who worked at the studio. And I was in Tom's office. We're like waiting for everybody to come in for a meeting. And he totally casually said, like, can you imagine like Minton and Eddie trying to take over the world? But not as like, hey, I'm pitching you an idea for the show. It was like just talking about your coworkers. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. That would be amazing. And then we started to develop that, into Pinky. And they started out as two humans, and then became mice, lab mice, obviously.
Once we construct a superconductive magnetic infundibulator, the world will be ours, Pinky.
It is often said when a golfer tees off, LV. What is 4, Alex?
What is north? What is point?
What is inordinately short attention span, Alex? The plans, Pinky, for the superconductive magnetic infundibulator. Shall I explain how it works?
North, challenge me.
I'm sure I will.
So, yeah, all of that stuff was really fun. And I was just I was really also learning a lot. I was pretty kind of a newbie, in that business at that time.
What are some of the things of course, you're considered one of the best writers of Pinky and the Brain. I mean, you even say as much in Yes Always. You tell the brain that right. You write some of his best material.
Which do you know his reply? Yes.
Shakespeare.
No, he says, you write drivel unsuitable for a light bulb commercial. Yeah.
Well, what are some of the things you loved about writing Pinky and the Brain?
Well, Pinky the Brain probably for me is like the closest to my own personal sensibility of almost anything I've worked on. And it's just it's what I call like intelligently silly. And, coming out of a sort of a Monty Python adolescence where, cause that's really what Monty Python is. It's like intelligently silly. There's an interesting type of comedic styles that is in the show, which is with Pinky and the Brain. They are serious people in a silly situation. Yeah, I know Pinky is silly, but they're very serious about what they're doing. And the situations are ridiculous, right? And that's a particular style of comedy. And then Yakko, Wacko, and Dot are more of the, Martin and Lewis version or Jerry Lewis of like silly people in serious situations, like the Three Stooges or the Marx Brothers, right? We're going to come in and mess up your world. And we're silly people. Pinky and the Brain was like, we're very serious about what we're doing, but the situation is preposterous, So it's I love that style of humor. It's really fun. I think it goes a little deeper, and then also you get to do cool stuff, like you get to parody things, like the Pinky and the Brain cartoon Das Mouse, where they steal a submarine from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute to go find the Titanic, and it's like, I get to do a subway chase like Crimson. What's the name of that movie? Crimson Tide. You get to do all the stuff from that thing. You get to make fun of it, but you also get to do it. You get to do all that sort of stuff. So that was like, I love that about Pinky and the Brain.
This is Captain Jack McGuire. Identify yourself. I repeat, identify yourselves or be destroyed.
This is Jacques Cousteau.
Really? Can you prove that?
Here, the ocean is teeming with life. But everywhere, there are signs of man's encroachment.
Darn! It is Jacques Cousteau. The mission is to terminate.
But Jacques Cousteau! He's a friend of the Earth!
Nice Cousteau, Brain.
Quiet, Pinky.
Ha! Nice try, Captain. Brain, is it? But that little ruse will cost you. I must admit, I admire your skills. Perhaps in another time we could have been friends. We are very much alike, you and
I doubt that. I am a lab mouse involved in an elaborate scheme to take over the world.
Ha ha! No need to be bitter. You played well. Au revoir, Jacques. We'll see you in Davy Jones' locker.
Didn't he sing lead for the Monkees?
Quiet, Pinky, or I shall have to...
And then, the other interesting thing that happened was the very first cartoon that I wrote was the Win Big, which was the very first Pinky and the Brain cartoon. And pretty much all the conventions of Pinky and the Brain are in that cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to do tomorrow night? Are you pondering what I'm pondering? There's other ones, where Pinky says where Brain proposes something and Pinky goes brilliant. Oh, wait, no. Well, if they take off their pants, right? Whatever it is, right? All these things that appear in almost all the Pinky and the Brain cartoons were in that one. And without the intention of making them into catchphrases or something like that, it was just it was one of those things. I think I wrote the next one and then maybe Sherry was oh, and then that thing that you close with, you got to put that in. I was oh, the thing, what are we doing tomorrow night? Yeah.
It's such a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was such a lesson too, that you have this premise of two mice who try to take over the world and fail. How can you do cartoon after, story after story after story after story? And it's really because it's not about taking over the world. It's always about, like Sherry's Bubba Bubba Brain, or talking about that when Brain runs for president, Meet John Brain, which was sort of inspired by Ross Perot. And there's, that's what those shows end up being about. They're not about taking over the world specifically.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you've not only written some fantastic episodes of Animaniacs, but you've also written fantastic songs like the Etiquette song in Taming of the Screwy, songs in King Yakko, songs in Baloney and Kids. What was the songwriting process like?
Everybody really wrote songs. We all just kind of got into it. And then, so some of them tended to be oh, I'm just doing funny lyrics to an existing song. For example, John McCann wrote the Panama Canal song and the UN song, and those were all taking sort of existing things like that. I think it's just about being kind of a hammy person and just getting into it and start singing a song and pretending and making it up and sort of acting it out. And then you have this sort of advantage that it's supposed to be funny and it's supposed to be broad, so you don't have to be some incredible, meticulous, amazing person. And then typically we'd kind of have a melody in the lyrics, maybe not always the melody. And then, Richard Stone and Steve and Julie Bernstein would do such a great job of either writing a melody if it didn't have a melody or orchestrating and harmonizing it. So that was all just really fun. That's just kind of like, oh, this is what those musicals sound like, kind of imitating it. It's almost, a lot of it actually, because it really comes out of kind of satire and parody, a lot of the songs, so they are, you kind of just do that.
How would you rate your experience as the producer and writer in the Pinky the Brain spinoff? I know that, of course, many people note the last episode that you wrote in that series. You'll never, what is it? You never eat
lunch in this.
Eat food pellets in this town again, I think, is kind of many people equate it to you being upset with the executives at Kids WB, Warner Brothers, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably I would say it's interesting because a lot of Pinky and the Brain stories were definitely influenced by ideas and things that came around in my life. For example, like, that time that Ross Perot ran for president, and then I was like, oh, we should just parody that situation that Brain runs for president, and then people only see him on TV, so they don't know he's a mouse. But What was the thing you asked me about?
It was just basically how would you rate your experience?
Right. Well, it was exciting, because they were like, we want to put this on prime time and do a primetime show, and they moved us to a different, so I was really we weren't at the regular Warner Brothers place. We were over at this it was actually a converted motel that Warner Brothers owned that was full of writers, and we had a staff like like more of a sitcom-y kind of situation. We're sort of aiming high. I think at that time it was kind of like, I guess I had felt a little exhausted, I guess, from just because it's been 6 years at Warner Brothers and writing all that kind of stuff. I didn't intentionally dig, I don't know, it's just parody, whatever. It wasn't like, I hate you guys. That came later, but yeah, I mean, it's just sort of making fun of some of that stuff, and the WB was a little weak, and that was frustrating when, like, much earlier than that, when Animaniacs came out. Certainly Tiny Toons was on Fox Kids and had a very wide distribution. And when the WB started up, it had a very small distribution, and our audience just shrunk like crazy, which was kind of a drag.
Yeah, it was very hard to watch. I remember, I think for the first year that the WB was on, it was very hard to get in our town of Tucson. I think we eventually were able to get it by watching the WGN.
We're to drive to the top of Mount Kruger and put our own antenna up.
Exactly. Well, crazy. I mean, at the time, it was. I mean, if you're syndicated channels, there's like what we have: ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, and then you have one or two, syndicated things, right? Or UHF stations. And if the UHF station didn't want to be a kids WB station, well, you're kind of out of luck. So.
Yeah. But it was good. We had some good, some good writers on that, and brought in some new people to write on that show, and did some fun things. And then, I mean, after that was when I left, and I went to Disney after that. And there were still more episodes to go.
Yeah.
So, it kind of carried on. And then also they stopped doing it. We just did one season prime time. Mm-hmm. Which was weird. It was like at 7 p.m. against 60 Minutes or something like that. I don't know who's going to watch this on the
when you went off to Disney with like One Saturday Morning, which is one of the things that I know that we loved watching, the shows on that. Of course, there was Manny the Uncanny with Paul Rugg. And is it true that you were out there filming with Paul Rugg these weird Manny the Uncanny segments?
I filmed, a lot of stuff in the beginning, and then when he really hit the road, when we sent him out on the road and stuff like that, I wasn't filming those, so I was still doing that. But what was really fun on that show, and we had, and Paul was involved, and we always have fun working together, was we come up with a bit, and we go like, oh, let's do a bit that sort of spoofs Steve Irwin, the naturalist guy, and Paul was playing the thing. And we take a camera and we take some equipment and go over to Griffith Park and shoot a bit. And then we go like, this is the bit we want to do. And we go like, okay. And we go do a bunch of them, and they would be on TV in 2 weeks. They would start showing. So we did a lot of that stuff, which was really, really fun to do. But Paul and I always have a lot of fun working together. Yeah. One of the things we would always do, when we were at Warner Brothers, is we would all wander around into each other's offices and sit around and just, yammer for a long period of time. But also we would do this thing where I go see Paul and I go like, I'm just having this problem because, they get to the top of the mountain and I need them to end up in the whatever. And it's like, I'm not sure how they get down there, something like that. And then, we'll talk about it. I'll talk about it. And then he'll go like, oh, what if they do this thing, and you go like, oh my God, that's it. That's amazing. It's brilliant. It's great. And then you go back to your office and write something totally different. It's like, but it was an interesting part of the creative process that it's like, oh, but you stirred my brain and you got me going. We also used to do the thing that we call the victory walk, which is like you have a problem in a script and you can't figure it out. And then all of a sudden you go like, oh, wait a minute. What if he shows up later and then blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's it. And you wouldn't sit down and write it. You would stand up and leave your office and go walk around. Right? And then you end up in somebody else's office, and it's like you were just doing your victory walk that you would solve that.
Is your writing process similar to Paul's in a sense? He's talked before about how he takes like lots of breaks and, writing. He's never been a fan of like writers' rooms and the writing process itself. He you write for a little bit and then you go and you do the lawn,
Paul is like, he's so funny. I mean, really, Paul's essence is a performer. It's like, that's where he is the happiest. It's just like being a performer. And writing, he's so good at it, and he's so funny, and he hates it. It's just like torture for him. And he takes forever. And it's just like and he won't get on to page 2 until he's like ecstatic about page 1. And it's just like, he just, and I've had him writing on other shows and stuff like that. It's always the same thing, and then it's always really good. So I'm similar, not as bad as he is, but we both do that thing. It's it's like a dog circling the bed, except for like 3 months, The dog circles the bed and then finally sits down, lies down, does that. We probably did, he and I wrote a couple of movies together, and we probably did better when we were together because you just had this other person was like, I'm expecting pages at 10 a.m. So that helped. We became deadlines for each other.
And just real quickly, one of the things that Tom Ruegger had shared with us at one point was some auditions for the characters of Animaniacs. And one of them that came up was audition for Runt. And it was actually your voice auditioning for Runt for this. And I don't know if you were actually auditioning for the part or if it was just kind of like a filling in at the moment.
I was probably filling in because I've done a lot of voices. I don't, besides playing myself in that Pinkie and the Brain thing, I don't think I did any regular stuff. I mean, we had this, we just come off of Tiny Toons. Tiny Toons had a big cast and all these super veteran voiceover actors. Mm-hmm. And that was definitely the pool we went to for sure. And I may have done Run. I actually like to do, that was Frank Welker ended up doing Run, and who also did Ralph Zagard, and which is also one of my go-to, just like talking like that. On the Kung Fu Panda series, I played a character called Guy Who Says Blah, and it was basically based on Ralph Zagard. He'd go like, "Blah, how you doing?" Right? So, "Blah, see you later." Blah. And that was Guy Who Says Blah.
And of course, you do the narrator on the Captain Underpants.
Yeah,
well, there's two narrators in Captain Underpants, right? We have Sean Astin, I believe, is one of them.
Sean, yeah,
and then you're the one that goes when it's all the comic strips are coming.
Yeah, those comic bits. I love those things. They're so good, and their drawings were so fantastic, and it was really fun to do that. But those things would be like, it was like a page of dialogue, and I would do like one full pass and be completely out of breath and die from doing that, but it's really fun.
What do you have advice? What I know there's a lot of aspiring voice actors that listen to podcasts like this. Do you have any advice for any folks who might be interested in voice acting?
Well, I think that the thing that people don't consider so much is that it is acting, and taking an acting class is a good idea. And being in tune with the idea, and it's like, how do you read a script? How do you do that? How do you find the emotion or whatever it is, in a thing? And I know this is a thing too. And like Rob Paulson and Maurice are really big on this, and just saying, do acting because it is acting. Also, D. Bradley Baker has a website that's like something like, I think I want to So You Think You Want a Voice Act or something like that. I can't remember what it's called. But he has a lot of resources and responses about what it's like. The thing about it, though, the honest part of it is not that many people are doing most of the work, and so to get into it, it's pretty difficult, and you kind of need to be exceptional or have an exceptional voice, or have a friend who's making a show. But that's kind of what's happening. But if you love it and you can do it, easily the biggest, very few people really break into like lots of work. It happens very rarely. I mean, like when we were doing Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, Jeff Bennett did tons of stuff. He was like a new guy, and he came in gangbusters. You could do impressions. You can do all these voices and all that kind of stuff. And then in the last few years, that's really been like Eric Bauza has been, this guy who's just exploded doing anything. He's insanely talented. And the other thing that's kind of beautiful about it is Eric Bauza has pictures of himself as a little kid with Marvin the Martian t-shirts and stuff like that. And now he's doing the voice for Marvin the Martian, and
yeah, I was just seeing the other day, he posted online like a picture of him and like Woody Woodpecker and Bugs Bunny and stuff like that as a kid. So it's really nice to see that someone who was such a fan of the cartoons gets to now have that dream job.
He has an exceptional voice. It's really like, you kind of have to think of it like being a singer, because it's kind of what you're doing, and so everybody can most likely sing something, but of course, obviously people's vocal abilities as singers is very different. And, so, that happens with voiceover people too. They just have a voice that prints really well, as we used to say, or they have a versatility, or they're super funny, or they do impressions, or something like that. But if you're interested in being a voice actor, do not forget that it is acting, and you should learn how to act. And that's the best skill to bring into it.
So you mentioned earlier Steven Spielberg, and I'm a big fan of his. So do you have any other stories about Steven, or what was he like when you met him?
Steven is great to work with. He's just super fun. He's a very nice guy. People go like, "What's he like?" And I go like, "He's a happy Walter Matthau." That's what he's like. But he, when you have a meeting with Steven and for example, when we were pitching the very first time I met him, we were pitching this Duff show, and we were like, and the dad has a sort of a lab, a workshop in the garage where he builds things, and you just say that, and then Steven goes off and riffs on that, and he goes like, oh, and he gets the kid slides plans in that his dad makes them absentmindedly, and he's got like a colander on his hat with flashlights, and it'll look really cool with the fog, and he'll just give you all this. He just starts riffing on it. And he gives you all this stuff, and you go like, wow, that's so cool. And then you walk out of the room and you go like, geez, can we actually use any of that? It's sort of like, there's so much of it. And he really loves it. And you never get the feeling from him like, this is a business for me. He loves cartoons, and as far as I know, he's also involved in the new Animaniacs and Pinky. I mean, I know he's attached to it and all that stuff, but he was, I mean, this guy, he's in Poland. He's shooting Schindler's List, this grittiest stuff, darkest stuff. He's shooting all day long. He's coming back to the house that they rented. He's getting pre-internet. He's getting Jurassic Park score satellited to his house so he can preview the score. And then he's watching tapes of our cartoons and faxing notes. I mean, he was really into it. He loved it. And then, apparently it was also really good for him after these grueling shooting days to be able to like watch some cartoons kind of at the end of the day. And he had ideas for stuff, and he would, for example, the Snowball, cartoon, which one of my faves, where Pinky and the Brain are going to take over Microsoft, or Microsponge as it's called, came out of Steven sending, hey, I was talking to Bill Gates, and he's really into pandas in China, and something, we should do something, with Bill Gates. And I mean, all we did was that was all we kept. We didn't do pandas in China. There is a gag in that thing though, where they're video conferencing, and then everybody who's on the video conference is sitting at the same table with a computer in front of them, which is probably what we're going to be doing
exactly
the rest of our lives.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
the metaverse, right? That's I think that's.
And then so I always had a great time working with Steven, and I never found it intimidating or anything. He was always very generous with his time, and because he was into it. He was, he really did it. And then I was going to go, there was a time I was going to go work at DreamWorks when DreamWorks had just started. And I was sort of in talks with DreamWorks and with Disney, and he was like calling me on the phone.
Wow.
He's calling me on the phone. I go, how's it going? He goes, oh, I'm in the Hamptons. And I go, what you doing? He goes, just looking out the window at my kids out on the baseball field, because they have a baseball field at their house.
Of course.
Yes. Always totally positive experience working with Steven. It's just a generous guy.
Nathan,
I highly recommend it, Kelly.
You gotta get him on the show.
Yeah.
I wish.
I have a listener question here from Malik. And he asks, what are some jokes or sequences that you're most proud of from the Animaniacs Pinky and the Brain? And he asks if there's anything you see in the final product that makes you go, wow, I can't believe that made it in. And then he also wanted to know how much of your personal experience seeped into aspects of the show. So it's like a 3-part separate questions. Any part of that you want to answer? I don't know.
I think he's answered some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of Pinky and the Brain moments that are really my favorite. I mean, the end of the Christmas special, obvious one. Just because that's probably the most successful emotional moment that I've probably ever written in my entire career. And it's kind of an interesting story how that came up. And I don't know, there's a lot. I can tell you an actual moment that I remember, which was we wrote the Win Big cartoon, and then sometimes when the cartoons would come back from overseas, we would do a little crew screening and say like, well, here's the thing. And so we had all these crew members in, and they saw the very first Pinky and the Brain, the Win Big, the one where he goes on Jeopardy. And there was some dude next to me, didn't know I wrote it, didn't know I was involved with it. And I just heard him like laughing during the whole thing. And then he said like, man, I want to work on that. And I was like, oh my God, somebody actually wants to work on something I made. There's so many. I mean, a lot of those ones, King Yakko is another one that's really fun that I really enjoy. And I really like the Bat Duck from Tiny Toons. It has some great moments in it that I love. In terms of stuff that we got away with, I mean, I don't know. We didn't really think of it so much that way. And we got away with a lot of stuff that just legally we wouldn't be able to get away with. But Gene McCurdy, who ran the studio, was totally protective of us. Warner Brothers Legal every now and then was like, did you guys write a cartoon spoofing the Three Tenors? Do you know that that's like one of our biggest selling recording artists that we have? And maybe that's not so cool. But we never, got really hammered for that stuff. We did that Noah's Ark cartoon where we're kind of spoofing Richard, the comedian Richard.
Oh God. Now I know the Noah one, right?
He's on, the Noah one. Yeah. He's on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Richard Lewis.
Richard Lewis.
Yeah, there we go. It's like Richard.
We're spoofing Richard Lewis. And, and then his people got back and say like, you're actually like ripping off his routine is what you're doing by doing an impression of him. But, we never got in trouble. And then, of course, the one that people always bring up is the fingerprints from the Hercule Yakko one that I wrote. And
now, that's been said before that, that was written in there that, fingerprints. And then Tress came up with the line of I don't think so. Was that, since you wrote that episode, do you remember putting in that I don't think so into the actual script? Or how did that, because that is it's so infamous that it's overplayed and everything to the point of nauseum. Yeah. But
I mean, if you asked me without the Tress thing, I would assume that I wrote it, but it's possible,
Yeah.
I don't know. Actors get a lot of credit for making stuff up that they didn't make up, but the actors get more mileage out of the show than anybody.
This is true.
You don't see me and Tom like signing autographs on Instagram, but because we don't have that kind of attraction. We're not the actors. That's just show business. It's totally fine. But you might see Rob and Maurice, my dear friends, doing that.
Yes,
because they can. Yeah.
Well, they can get you in on that next time. My gosh. Okay. Well, anyway.
I know. Anytime I did a panel at Comic-Con and it's like all the actors are there and then like me and another writer or something like that. And you just like, nobody cares about our signatures. But, okay, wait. So there was like, what do I remember? What did I get away with? And then there was a third part. from my life. I think a lot of Pinky and the Brain stories were things that just occurred to me that I noticed. And one of them that I really liked was when we were working at Warner Brothers is when Spielberg started making the movie Casper, and he hired Sherry and Deanne Oliver to write it. And I was just thinking about this progression that happens all the time, which is like something comes out, it's very popular and it's current, and then it becomes dated, and then it gets a nostalgic value. Right. So it happens with fashion. It happens with music. It happens with TV. It happens with all kinds of stuff. And then also you have this thing of like Spielberg and George Lucas. George Lucas loved, those old sci-fi movies with Buster Crabbe, I'm forgetting names all the time here, but, Buck Rogers and, and it's like, oh, I want to make something that had that feeling that I felt when I watched Buck Rogers. And then you end up with Star Wars. And the same thing about like, oh, remember those adventure movies where they went and found diamonds in Africa? And that's where Indiana Jones comes out of. So it's the same thing of these guys who are in a creative peak and wanting to kind of glorify something from their childhood and create something that way, in that same way. So there's the Pinky and the Brain cartoon where it's the 50s and they decide to make themselves really popular on a sort of a Kukla, Fran and Ollie puppet show.
Yes. Rulers, I believe.
Puppet Rulers. But Brain's whole plan is based on this idea, which is we'll be really popular. We'll freeze ourselves in a glass butter dish for X amount of years. And when we come back, all these people will be in power and they'll glorify us. So it was really that whole idea. So a lot of times, and then of course what happens is that they come back and all those people are traumatized because they went off the air and they chased them with their therapy bills. But so
which is very much like fans today, by the way, too, with George Lucas ruined my childhood. And
exactly.
Like
I was like, it's
right.
Kind of fortuitous. Yeah.
Even that in itself was very predictive.
They wanted it to come back until it does come back, and then they hate it. So it's
I know. And that's a really challenging thing to do, because if you repeat it, like that first Star Wars movie that Disney made was basically like a repeat of Episode 4. It was like almost the same movie, and it's like, yeah, it's really popular, but it's you kind of go like, wasn't amazingly fresh, but that whole cycle too of things going away and coming back. It also happens to me is that the people who watched Animaniacs and Pinky and Brains as little kids are now like 35 and they're 40 and so now I hear more about those shows now than I did, 15 years ago or 20 years ago.
Right.
Because, and those people are in positions of power in studios and things like that. And they're familiar with those things. That's why there's a lot of times like, there'll be a remake of some old show, and it's because the executive who's in charge loved that show when they were a kid.
Did they happen to actually reach out to you, by the way, when they were getting all those reboot plans together for the new Animaniacs show?
No, I didn't. They did because they wanted me to come write Pinky and the Brain. And because I went over and I talked to them and I said, like, this is a tricky show because it really was based on the personalities of all of us that were developing it.
Right.
And it was like, everything was kind of unique. And it's sort of like doing, Mr. Skullhead was Sherry's thing. It was like a thing she'd been drawing forever, and everybody had their own personal connection, which is where the things that really succeeded, that's why, and it sounded like originally that's what they were going to try to do and add a lot of, obviously they got rid of tons of, is it only Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, so I think they were going to sort of develop more stuff and use different kinds of animation and stuff like that and blah, blah, blah.
They have a little bit, but yes, there's for 90% of everything on that show is just Warner's and Pinky and the Brain with some new characters that, at least in my experience, not many people care about as much as the original side characters.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, part of it coming into that was just like, I don't really know of a reboot that has the kind of energy that the original did. I don't know. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but in general, it doesn't really pop. You know, it's sort of like, oh, you grew up with Sherman and Peabody, but it turns out kids today aren't interested in Sherman and Peabody.
You referred to it a little bit, and we actually have a question from one of our patrons here, MJ. She actually is one of the hosts of the Pointcast, actually, which is the Pinky and the Brain podcast. Oh, well. And but she wants to know, she says, hello, Peter. Firstly, I want to just express how much I enjoyed your writing on Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs. And she had a couple questions, one of which I think we've kind of gone through. But she does ask, what was the inspiration for the famous brain reading Pinky's letter to Santa? And that scene.
Oh my gosh. That was like a big life event for me, that whole thing, for a couple of reasons. So what happened was I think Gene came or Tom came and said, like, we want to do a Pinky and the Brain Christmas special. So I was the Pinky and the Brain guy. So it's like, okay, figure out what it is. And I just really sweated it out. And I had two main stories to do. And one was in a classic Tiny Toons / Animaniacs approach, turn it on its head, do a meta version, and it's that Brain realizes the emotional power of Christmas specials, and so he's going to make a Christmas special.
Okay.
Like very, very, in the pocket with Tiny Toons and Animaniacs. And he was going to do a Christmas special called The Littlest Snowflake. And that was going to be a total tearjerker, and then everyone would be a sucker, and he'd be able to, manipulate their brains.
Okay.
And then, I had a whole story worked out for that. And then I had this other one, which was about creating these hypnotic dolls and going to the North Pole and getting Santa Claus to make them. And because Santa Claus has this incredible distribution system on Christmas Eve. And, and then I talked to Tom about them, and then he's like, I think we want to do a Santa story. But I hadn't quite figured it out. And I sat at my dining room table with a notebook and just kept writing like freehand. What could it be? What could it be? Something, and then something. And then I got to the letter, and it's like, it was the beginning of it was, oh, Pinky has a letter and he wants to deliver it to Santa in person. That's it, blah, blah, blah. And then just light bulb moment. It's like, oh my God, this letter is all about the brain. That's what it's about. And it was like, I was like, I didn't even think about it. It just came and landed. It's funny because I still have that notebook, and I found the page where it's like, oh, there it is right there. When I go like, wait, Pinky writes the letter all about the brain.
Wow.
And then that thing it really opened up. And, so when we got around to, doing it, and I gave the script to, Barry Caldwell, who is one of the storyboard artists who worked on it. It was a really brilliant guy. And it was funny because when I started on Tiny Toons, Barry gave me such a hard time about, like, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're talking about. Why do I have to do what you do? And in retrospect, he's totally right. It was like, I was acting like I was a director, and I'd like worked in animation for 4 seconds. And he was like, who the hell are you? Right. His office was right next to mine. And then he got the script for the Christmas special, and he knocks on my door, and he opens the door, and he just stands there, and he goes, Brain cried. You made Brain cry because I love this so much. I love this, right? He boarded the whole second half of it, and then he really got into it. So he was the one who goes like, what if when Brain realizes what's going on, that he smashes all the equipment? And I'm like, oh, that is awesome. That was Barry's idea, and then that moment is just like, I don't know. It's just so great. I love it.
Dear Santa, hello, haha, Narth. This year, Santa, I ask for nothing, but I wish to tell you about my dear friend, the Brain. He is honest and very hard-working, and only wants what's best for the world, but he gets no reward. He is only greeted with defeat. He never gives up, but I know it must be very hard. So please, take anything that you had for me and give it to my best friend in the whole world, the Brain. Love, Pinkie. P.S. By any chance do you have in that big old bag of yours the world?
You're on.
Hey, look at that.
You're on, Brain.
Ladies and gentlemen of the world, you will do as I say. For I command you. I command you to. Have a Merry Christmas, everyone. Have a Merry, Merry Christmas. Joy to the world. Yes.
And it's also part of, my thing with Pinkie and the Brain that it's really kind of a love story and they're really kind of a couple, in a way of, friends. And there's a couple things that happen sometimes with Pinkie and the Brain that I didn't like so much. I don't like it when Brain is sort of really, really malicious and physically violent with Pinkie. That never felt right to me. It happens now and then, but I didn't do that. And the other thing is that, it's always Brain's fault that the plans don't work, and it's not Pinkie's fault, and, that they were just partners in that, and that the Brain believes he should take over the world because it's the best thing for the world, not because he's an evil guy and like screw everybody. It's like, you don't understand. You people would be better off if I ran the world. It's that simple, The whole topic too of it, because a lot of people sort of call this out, that Pinkie is sort of not the person who messes up the plans.
Because he's the genius.
Yeah, right. Which one? One's a genius, the other's insane. Which one? My initials are hidden in that opening, by the way.
Oh yes.
There was one cartoon that I wrote that I just loved, which is called That's Smart, and it's where Brain is trying to figure out what's wrong with his plans, and he realizes that it's because Pinkie's too dumb. It's like, that's why these plans are failing. And so he builds this very complicated gizmo and he makes Pinkie really smart. And Pinkie starts analyzing all his plans and realizing, he says like, and using all these scientific terms, he goes like, the molecules won't have enough expansion time to be able to compress in that space, and knocking down Brain's plans over and over. And then the Brain realizes it's like, but he yells at Pinkie, gets totally mad at him, and sends Pinkie off in a huff. And he realizes it's like they need balance in their partnership. And Pinkie is now smarter than him, so he needs to be the dumb one.
Right.
And then he goes and he reverses the machine, right? But Pinkie does the same thing because his feelings are so hurt by he doesn't like being smart. And so they both end up too stupid to operate the machine. And it's the end of that's the one that ends with like, what are we going to do tomorrow night, Brain? And Brain says like, I have no idea. Yeah. But it was about addressing that whole idea about like, who's the smart one? Why do the plans fail? And, I don't know. It's sort of, to me, that's like ironic life situation that you would just run into, anywhere.
Well, I'm glad you pointed out, just as a side note, that the Brain believes himself to be a benevolent ruler, that he believes he would make the world a better place. And I think somewhere along the lines with the reboot now, they're he's literally calling himself a supervillain. Like he's fantasizing about like zapping people with electricity and chasing them around with exploding things. And I was thinking to myself, that doesn't feel right. He's not like a villainous person or mouse. He just really believes he's the smartest man or mouse in the world, and the world would be a better place if only he were in charge.
Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of a hidden sort of sweetness to that character grouping. And I know that I think I had heard that too, that it was sort of like somebody saying like, I don't know, maybe just comedy in general is more mean spirited now than it used to be. But, that, some of those episodes were kind of coming in, that way. The other thing too, that I sort of always shied away from, is I didn't like to do the pop culture references as much in Pinky and the Brain, like we did in Animaniacs, which was like free for all. We're just mentioning. So there's sometimes it was somebody, Pinky, like in the Christmas special, Pinky mentions like Regis Philbin and stuff like that. But I kind of shied away from doing that. Although after I was gone, there was tons of it. Yeah. In terms of the pop culture. So I liked referencing real life, but not necessarily, making tons of jokes about, whatever is current at that time, Britney Spears or whoever it was.
Interesting.
So as a writer, how often do you get those magical light bulb moments that you just mentioned?
Not super often, but that experience of forcing myself to stay with it and forcing myself to to stay in it, because I got to the point working on that episode where I was like, I hope they cancel this. I hope they call me up and they say like, Peter, never mind. We're not doing the Christmas special. You're off the hook. And I go like, oh, thank you. Right. But that wasn't the case. And I had to stick with it in the tough, really, really tough part of just creating something out of nothing. And it's the hardest part about writing. And I got the result, so that for me was like just a really good lesson, and I'm still doing it. Right now I'm writing this Dogman movie at DreamWorks, and I have to do the same thing sometimes. It's like you just got to stick with it. So I don't know whose expression this is, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's inspiration will find you, but it has to find you working. And so I really believe in the discovery process, and that it's like, you don't need to know the answers, but you kind of want to know what direction you're going. It's like, I want to point in the right direction, start going down that road and see what's on the road, doing that. It doesn't happen, that sort of light bulb inspiration doesn't happen as much as you would want it to, but the other thing is, when you have a lot of experience, how bad you are improves. It's sort of like, it's still hard, but the results are better, kind of. It's really what happens, But it's funny, I was really thinking about that, like that Pinky the Brain moment today, because I'm working on this script, and it's like, I thought to myself, it's like, I need one of those moments. I need that. It's like, it's surprising, but totally logical and really heartfelt, that kind of thing.
I see a question from Kelsey, and it just is, where did the idea for Snowball come from? Don't hear about Snowball enough, I think.
I know, I love Snowball. Snowball was voiced by Roddy McDowall, and he was great. Most people today don't know who Roddy McDowall is, but famously one of the apes in Planet of the Apes. Yes. And but he had a huge career, and he was really great to work with. I think it was just about, I love that episode for several reasons. And I love the idea that Snowball comes in. He's like the evil brain. He is the guy who does want to just take over, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And not for the benefit of anybody else except for himself. So he's like the more evil version of the brain. And I love the idea that Pinky and the Brain got split up in that episode, that he seduced Pinky into working for him. And the scene where Brain is now like a dude pushing a shopping cart made out of a little plastic strawberry thing with, a little strawberry crate with little buttons on it. And he's got the beard. And then there's a shot from, like, let's do that shot from Shawshank Redemption with the rain falling down. down where he needs to save the world and he rips his beard off and screams because it's so incredibly painful. But Snowball did not have any special origin except that we needed a villain for the episode, and so we needed somebody from the lab, so he became the evil hamster who's in that.
Last question here is from Drew, and he says he always wondered, where did the idea from TV or not TV come from? This is where Brain becomes a stand-up comedian and gains a WB sitcom while trying to advance his plan.
I mean, the idea from that is just real life, because that's what was happening. It's like you were a dude doing stand-up, and they're going to develop a sitcom about you, right? Isn't that the one where he has the smile? He has like a hypnotic smile with it. It's the catchphrase, repugnant. Yeah, I think that's that episode, right? Because that's repugnant, and he gets his catchphrase. But that's really from, literally just looking outside, looking out the window, looking on TV, and noticing these kind of trends. It's kind of where it is. So it's having this sort of eyes wide open, for these sort of real life events.
The WB lineup at that time, if you can watch them online, there's a lot of comedians that had one season of a show.
Yeah, it was like Cleghorn. When Alan Cleghorn was on Saturday Night Live, and Wayans was on.
The Wayans runs, yeah.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, Peter, thank you so much. This has been such a treat having you on, just talking about your experiences with the show, with Animaniacs, Pinky Brain, Tiny Toons. It's, every time we're able to have one of the writers on here to get some of these behind the scenes and really the inspiration for these stories we all love. It's much appreciated. So we'd just like to thank you again on behalf of our listeners and all the fans of the show. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us right now.
Total pleasure. Anytime.
Well, I think we better get to some contact information right now. So, Nathan, where could people find you online?
Joey, I'm on Twitter, JangoFT. That's me.
All right. And Kelly, what about you?
I'm also on Twitter, Yoda Princess, YODAPRNCSS, or email me, Kelly@BigShinyRobot.com.
All right. And Peter, I believe you're on Instagram. Is that correct?
I'm on Instagram, but it's basically like my art photo display. So
it's still cool photos, though. I mean, it's not like it's
just Peter Hastings on Instagram, and that's pretty much my social presence right now. Just sort of, I never hit Twitter, and I begged off of Facebook. So
Instagram's the most chill of all the places to go to. I agree with that decision.
Well, I do tons of work as a photographer, and that's basically who I follow and what I look at on Instagram. Well, as long as I don't get sucked into watching reels of bridge collapses in China and how dudes make bricks in Uganda. Yes.
Well, the Animanicast, of course, is on a bunch of different socials. We're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all that jazz. And, of course, you can find all of our shows at animanicast.com or any podcast player you like. And, hey, we're a proud member of the RetroZap Podcast Network, so you can go to our Discord, which is discord.animanicast.com. You can talk to us and all the RetroZap people over there. And let's see, what else? Oh yeah, our Patreon, patreon.com/Animanicast, where you can get not only bonus audio of our show, but also audio commentaries as well for episodes of the show. So, on behalf of Kelly, Nathan, and Peter, this is Joey saying good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Perfect. This podcast is not endorsed by Warner Brothers or Amblin Entertainment and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Animaniacs, Tiny Toon Adventures, Freakazoid, the Warner Brothers logo, all names, pictures, and sounds are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of the Animanicast unless otherwise indicated.
Hurry, Your Majesty. These are desperate times. You must meet the cabinet.
Hello, I'm Yakko. Nice to meet you.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine.
Sire?
Wait till we're alone.